Hello guys, welcome to the Parson series, and today we will be starting the chapter number 9. Now this has a special importance because it is about the clinical investigations, which definitely play a very big role in ophthalmology. So as far as your clinical postings are concerned, your ward leaves are concerned, your vivas are concerned, your NEET PG is concerned, for every aspect this of the topic is going to make a lot of difference. So let's get started with the important investigations in ophthalmology. The first one which they have given is the specular microscopy. So this specular microscopy, which you know that it is all about the imaging of the corneal endothelium, and corneal endothelium is the most vital layer of the cornea. So you cannot, escape the importance of knowing the shape of the endothelial cells, the count of the endothelial cells, because this is one big factor when you are taking the cornea for the transplantation. Also you must see what is the shape of the cells, what is the count of the cells, and for that you require the specular microscopy. So this in itself is a question. The first important question will be that what is the use of specular microscopy. Now the corneal endothelium can be examined cursorily by the specular examination on the slit lamp. If you don't have the specular microscopy, before that you can also do it under the slit lamp examination. For that you have specular examination technique on the slit lamp. If you do not know what is the specular examination technique, you can first look at the video of the slit lamp. Okay. Objective examination with the specular microscope makes it possible to observe a relatively large number of endothelial cells, then photograph them and also study their morphology. In this instrument, light passes through a slit aperture. So it is passing through a slit aperture and then it is going through a system of mirrors. So whole of optics is related, which direct the light into the cornea through the objective lens and its attached dipping cone. So there is series of mirrors and all, due to which you have that possibility, you have that magnification possible by which you are able to see not only the shape as well as the number of endothelial cells, the dipping cone lens. Now I think you must be thinking that what is this dipping cone. So dipping cone, actually they have rightly described, it has a flat surface extension on the water immersion objective that applanates the cornea as in the applanation tonometry. So something related to the applanation tonometry, because ultimately this lens also has to touch the surface of the cornea, only then it is able to capture the endothelial layer. The focusing knob adjusts the excursion of the dipping cone so that you are able to focus the image of the cornea for the different thicknesses. Now this focusing process is used to additionally provide an objective measurement. The light is reflected from the endothelium through the objective eyepieces at 200 magnification and may be observed through an eyepiece, camera or monitor. So you come to know about the objectives, what is the use of specular microscope, what is the other way you can see the endothelium, that is your specular reflection over the slit lamp, and what is the amount of magnification that you are using here, that is 200 plus. So this is actually the line diagram of the specular microscopy that we are using for the corneal endothelium, and this is how it looks. So when you are given this particular image, you should know that these hexagonal cells which you are able to see here, can you see this? This is your hexagonal cells. So this hexagonal cells which you are seeing here, these are your endothelial cells. So when you are doing, because it is a computerized machine, not only it is telling you the shape of the cells, it is also telling you the total count of the cells, and definitely it is a prerequisite, a very important question. This is definitely a prerequisite for the corneal transplantation, that is penetrating keratoplasty. When you are doing, you always have to do first the specular microscopy along with the slit lamp examination. Now coming to some of the database questions which could be used. Now though one-liner questions will be very less, but they could be asked in the assertion and reasoning type of questions. So data, you should know. So average endothelial count is about 2800 cells per millimeter square. Now sometimes what they are doing when they are giving you it in the options, they are saying it is 2000 to 3000, or they can say between 2500 to 3000. So any value which is between 2000 to 3000 will be deemed as correct. Okay, 2800 it is. Now with the aging, what is happening? There is a decrease in the cell density as well as the variation in the size also. So with the aging, not only you have got changes in one of the characteristics, you have got changes in both the characteristics, you have got change in the shape as well as change in the size also. So we can have pleomorphism, we can also have the polymegathism. These two changes can occur with the aging. The specular microscope enables the surgeon to perform a cell count before using the material for the corneal grafting. So that is what I told you, it is a prerequisite for the corneal grafting. There is a certain amount of endothelial cell loss even after the intraocular surgery. So again, this is an important statement. Is it true or false? It can be asked. So yes, it's a true statement. Even after the intraocular surgeries, there is a definite number of cells that is being lost there. Now another instrument that allows a direct visualization of the corneal cells is the confocal microscope. So what are the things that I can use to see the corneal cells in vivo? I can use the specular reflection in the slit lamp, I can use the specular microscopy, then I can also use the confocal microscope, right? Based on complex optical principles, this acquire multiple images of the cornea from the epithelium right up to the endothelium. The images are magnified and show endothelial as well as epithelial cells, as well as they are showing the keratocytes. Now analysis of these images provide detailed information regarding the cell number, average cell area as well as the cell density. So all the important things that you need to know about the specular microscopy and the questions expected from you at your level are being covered. Now the second thing is your topography as well as the pachymetry. Topography means estimating the surface along with its curvature, while curvature part is characteristically called as the keratometry part. And then we have got the thickness of the cornea. Thickness of the cornea is related to the pachymetry. The curvature of the anterior surface of the cornea is measured by the keratometer, and the corneal thickness, so I will put it by different color, thickness is by the pachymeter. And how you are going to use them. So what we are using, the optical pachymeter on a slit lamp, or we can just use the ultrasonic pachymeter also, right? The topography. Then the third thing is your topography. So topography of the anterior and posterior surface, it is done by the digital analysis over the several points, because if I want to know the surface, I require whole of the surface of cornea. So what we are doing digitally, we are analyzing so many points at a time on the surface of the cornea for better planning of the cataract surgeries as well as the refractive surgeries. Now especially important the corneal surfaces when we are doing the surgeries which are for refraction, because refraction is affected by the surface of the cornea. Then when you are planning the cataract surgery, because the final outcome of the cataract surgery is also dependent upon the astigmatism. Astigmatism depends upon the corneal sutures, and corneal sutures is changing the corneal surface. So again, these are the kind of surgeries which are definitely affected by the surface of cornea. So this is your oculus pantachem. I don't want you to go into the details of this pantachem, but certainly you should know what is the name of this investigation, number one, and you should also know that why we are doing it for the topography. So definitely you should be able to recognize it. This is the pantachem, and we have got 4 refractive surfaces here, something like this, right? Then we have got another ocular pantachem, and we have got these 4 refractive maps, so you should know them, right? Now if you compare, okay, the first one is the keratoconus and the second one is normal. Now if this, you see, this is your normal one. Can you see more of green color here? So more of green means more of normal. If you remember your traffic lights, okay, you can go by that. You are having the 3 colors. So if I have more of green, that means it is more towards normal. Now if you are going with the keratoconus, can you see we have got more of different colors? So more of red is coming. Red means stop. So there is some problem. So you can you know, remember it like this, that more the green color you are getting in the pantachem, that means it is towards the normal side. Now, a much asked and requested topic. So many of you have requested to talk about the anterior segment OCT. So the anterior segment OCT, first of all, you should know its full form, because many times it is written as this. So AS is anterior segment, OCT is simple ocular, what you called as optical coherence tomography, which is the same one that you have read for the posterior segment also. Now, because you know this OCT is mainly for your posterior segment, when we are using it for the anterior segment, we call it as anterior segment OCT. This is using the light to provide a non-contact method of evaluating the anterior segment along with the high resolution, but cannot image structures behind the uvea. So this anterior segment OCT has some advantages while also having some disadvantages. The advantages are the high resolution. You have got the evaluation of anterior segment, and it's a non-contact method, but the problem is that we cannot go beyond the uvea. So if you look here, what are the things you are able to see? This is the quantitative analysis of the anterior segment thickness. So what are the things I can measure here? So see, I can see the corneal thickness, anterior chamber depth, angle to angle distance, and angle width in degrees. This could be again asked as a question, that what are the things that you can see with the help of anterior segment OCT. So if you try to analyze here, see, these are the layers of the cornea. So of course I can see the thickness of the cornea, something like this. I can also see the anterior chamber depth. This structure is your iris, can you see? So I can see this anterior chamber depth also. I can see the corneal thickness also, and then I can also see the angle width. I can see this also. So these are the basic things that I can see with the anterior segment OCT. Then next we come to the ultrasound biomicroscopy. Ultrasound biomicroscopy. Now here they are trying to tell you that what are the other things that we can do with the help of our standard investigations. You already know OCT. So with the help of OCT, which is basically used for the posterior segment, we can also assess the anterior segment. Similarly, you already know the ultrasound. So what are the other things that we can do with the ultrasound? So that is your ultrasound biomicroscopy. Now this is very, very high frequency. What was the normal frequency of ultrasound? That was 8 to 10. This is having 50 to 80 megahertz, and that is why we are having the histological resolution of the anterior segment structures by the ultrasound biomicroscope. So what is the short form? This is your UBM. So you should know when I am talking about UBM what it is actually meaning to say. UBM is ultrasound biomicroscopy. It is having a high resolution. So we are having a very high frequency, 50 to 80, and when you are using it, you are able to see the very high resolution of the anterior segment structures. These are specifically defining the abnormalities of the anterior chamber angle, the limbus, as well as the anterior part of the retina. Now there was a limitation of the ASOCT that we were not able to go beyond the uvea, but here I do not have that problem. I can see the anterior chamber angle, I can also see the limbus, and even I am seeing the anterior part of the retina. So can you see the difference between the two? Though both of them can be used for the anterior segment, but of course one has certain limitations and one does not have that. So see this with the help of UBM. If you look here, we have got a bleb here. So a bleb means that filtering bleb that we make in trabeculectomy. So they can ask you, suppose we have got a person who had undergone the trabeculectomy, and I want to check that filtering bleb, then which investigation I should do, whether I should do the slit lamp, anterior segment OCT, or I should do the OCT only, or I should go with the ultrasound biomicroscopy, or I should do A scan, just the B scan. So your answer will be the ultrasound biomicroscopy that can show me the filtering bleb too. Now we come to the fluorescein angiography. I think there is no need to tell you how much important fluorescein angiography is, especially with respect to the posterior segment, right? So this is actually the angiography of the fundus, and it is based on the detection of fluorescent light which is emitted by the dye in circulation. So what we are doing the injection of a dye, so that dye is first going to the systemic circulation. From that systemic circulation it is going to the retina, and when it is circulating in the retina, this dye is actually emitting the radiation. So it is absorbing the light of one wavelength, it is emitting of the another wavelength, making it fluorescent, so that we can see whole of the arterial structure. So this is the basic concept of fluorescent angiography. So if you have any of the defect there, then that will become prominent on angiography. This fluorescence is produced by the IR radiation of the dye with light of a wavelength within the absorption band of the fluorescein and the blood mixture. So they are absorbing the light of lower wavelength, that is 420 to 490 nanometer, and what they are doing, they are emitting higher wavelength. This is your 510 to 530. So this is again important. They are absorbing lower one and they are releasing the higher one, and it is passed through a barrier, filter barrier to the film, and with complete exclusion of the IR radiating light. So again, this is a very basic principle, and for the fluorescein dye, which filter we are using? Cobalt blue filter we are using. Now fluorescein is readily bound to the albumin in the bloodstream. When it is going into the bloodstream, it is not freely circulating, it is bounding to the protein albumin. The blood retinal barrier, by preventing the dye leakage in the physiological state, facilitate the delineation of the retinal vessels. Now they will say that if this dye is flowing, okay, and will it remain there or will it get leaked? So because it is bounding with the albumin and we have got the blood retinal barrier, so there is no dye leakage in the physiological state. In the normal state, I will not have any leakage, and that is why I can see whole of the arterial system. In the choroidal circulation, now when it is going to the choroidal system, it reaches choroidal system earlier than the retinal system. So when it is passing through the choroidal system, it passes freely across the endothelium of the capillaries to the extravascular spaces. A physiological barrier to the dye prevents the passage across the Brooks membrane and the intact retinal pigment epithelium. So while it is passing through the choroid, okay, we have got the this fluorescein, okay. First is it is passing freely across the endothelium and it is going to the extravascular space, but beyond that it is not able to go because we have got the Brooks membrane and we have got the tight junctions in the retinal pigment epithelium, and that is why we say that we have got two barriers. One is your outer blood retinal barrier, one is your inner blood retinal barrier. The outer one is made by the tight junctions of the RPE, while the inner one is made by the endothelial cells. So whenever I have a problem in the endothelial cells, it will freely go and I will be able to see some defects. So that is your inner blood retinal barrier. But if I have some problem with the tight junctions of the RPE, then there will be disruption of the outer blood retinal barrier. Okay. Now when the dye enters the eye, initially it is reaching the choroid. There is a choroidal blush, and then dye can be followed through the retinal arterioles. Then we have the capillary bed, then into the veins. So this is the order how it is going, because the most vascular part of the eye is the choroid. So first it is reaching to the choroid, and then it is reaching to the retina and veins, and then it is first laminated due to a differential flow of the blood. Now usually when we are recording, we have got an early phase also and we have got a late phase also. So this late phase is usually recorded for 5 to 30 minutes after the injections. So again this is important. They can again ask certain true and false type of statements or reason assertion type of statements that late phase is taken. So late phase will be between 5 to 30 minutes, right? Now see this. This is your normal fluorescent angiogram. Now before you are able to see the retinal pathology, you should be able to visualize the normal angiography also. So these are your normal angiograms, okay. Now if you look at this one, the first one, this is your choroidal flush. Choroidal flush means you are able to see the dye in the choroid. So can you see a patchy pattern is there? Whole of the dye is going into the choroid. So this is appearing in the choroid 1 to 2 seconds before it is reaching into the retinal circulation. Now what they are saying, that when present, cilioretinal arteries fill along the choroidal flush, since both are supplied by the short posterior ciliary arteries. Along with this, now when it is going to the choroid, it is also filling the cilioretinal arteries. What is the reason? Why cilioretinal arteries? Because both are supplied by the same source, that is short posterior ciliary arteries. So sometimes they are also catching the questions from these short notes which are written beyond the figure. Now if you look at the second one, now look at this. Now can you see the vessels, the great vessels are also delineating in the B. So what is this? Now we have started with the arterial phase. Arterial phase kab aayega? When it is reaching to the retinal arteries. First it was going to the short posterior ciliary arteries, from that we were having the choroidal flush, and it is also going to the cilioretinal arteries. Then it is going to what? It is going to the retinal arteries. Retinal arteries means now we will have arterial phase. So now it is going to the central retinal artery and the central retinal vein. That is why the great vessels have become visible. So what is the arm to retina time? What is arm to retina time? This is again a very important question. When you are injecting the dye here and you are able to see the dye in the retinal circulation, what is that time? It is approximately 12 seconds. Very, very important. It is approximately 12 seconds. Now once you are done with this, then the next is arteriovenous phase. Now from the artery it is going to the veins. So this phase comprises the time when the retinal arteries, capillaries and veins contains the fluorescein. Now first of all we have got the early AV phase. So in the early AV phase we have got thin columns of the fluorescein are visualized. Okay. So we have got choroidal, then we have got retinal, okay, arterial phase, then we have got arteriovenous phase, and finally we have got the venous phase. In the venous phase, it is going to exit from the retinal arteries and the capillaries, and the concentration is increasing in the veins. So there is a decrease in the arteries, fluorescence, and increase in the fluorescence of the vein. So I think this is very, very, self-explanatory, because you know that the route is through choroid. Now when it is going to choroid, it is also going to cilioretinal artery. Then it is going to retinal artery. From retinal artery, it will go to the capillaries. From the capillaries, it will go to the veins. So slowly and slowly, there will be exit from the arteries and capillaries. There will be entry into the veins. Fluorescence of the artery will decrease and the veins will increase, right? Then we reach to what you call as the mid phase. Now I am reaching to mid phase. Mid phase means the recirculation phase. It is occurring 2 to 4 minutes after the injection. Now after 2 to 4 minutes we get a mid phase. So what is mid phase? Mid phase means when the arteries and veins are somewhat equal in brightness, because after more of the time will elapse, arteries will decrease in the fluorescence and veins will increase. So I require a time when both of them are in mid phase, that is 2 to 4 minutes, right? Okay, the intensity of fluorescence diminishes slowly during this phase as the fluorescein is removed by the kidney. So obviously the removal of this fluorescein is by kidney. So if I have some patient having some kidney problems, this will be contraindicated. Then I have got the late phase. Talking about the late phase of the angiogram demonstrates the gradual elimination of the dye from the retina and the choroidal vasculature. Staining of the optic disc will be there. Then any other areas of late hyperfluorescence. So if I have got any areas which are showing the late hyperfluorescence, that means there is a abnormality and there is a leakage. So I think line by line you have understood every part, starting from the early phase, choroidal phase, arterial, arteriovenous and venous, why and what we are going to get. Alright. So these fluorescein angiograms actually reveals the dissolution of any physiological barriers, if there is any leakage of the dye across the Brooks membrane or the dye is persisting for the longer time, that can be explained on this physiological grounds. Whatever problem we are having, we are able to explain it. Retinal pigments, if I talk about the retinal pigments and the RBCs, they are absorbing the fluorescent light, and such tissues may therefore mask the fluorescence in the deeper structures. Now, in what respect they are talking, can you understand this? They are saying that wherever I have got more of pigment, like I have got the retinal pigment epithelium, I have got more of the melanin there. If I am talking about the central area, the macular area, there also I have got more of pigment. So what they are doing, I have got a foveal avascular zone also. So wherever I have got more of pigments, they are masking the effect of fluorescence, and that is why normally also we have got an area which looks blackish in color in the macula, that is your foveal avascular zone. On the other hand, migration of the pigment, if I have got a migration of the pigment, then this gives access to the deeper fluorescence, and this will give you a window defect. Now fluorescent angiography is particularly useful in exposing the depth. If I want to know the depth of the pathological involvement, like in the diabetic retinopathy, or if I want to get the new vascularization. So obviously if there are new blood vessels, more of the blood, more of the fluid, more of the dye will be going. right? It gives a clear idea of the integrity of the vascular tree in the assessment of the disorders of the fundus, neoplasia, disorders of the optic nerve head like papilledema. It is also useful in the interpretation of neovascularization of the iris, where you are having a first sign of rubeosis. So definitely speaking, fluorescein angiography will play a very important role wherever we are suspecting the disorders related to the vasculature, be it a diabetic retinopathy, cystoid macular edema, central serous retinopathy, ARMD, wherever we are suspecting that either new blood vessels have been formed, there is evidence of neovascularization, be it in the optic disc, be it over the iris, in the rubeosis iritis, or you know, you are having the disruption of the blood retina barriers. It could be outer blood retinal barrier or it could be inner blood retinal barrier. These angiography will definitely help. Now when it comes to the choroidal circulation, it is the another kind of angiography which is preferred, and that is your indocyanine green angiography. So a line about this also. This is actually the dye which is staying, okay, it is staying within the choroidal circulation and it is stimulated by the longer wavelength of light than the fluorescent dye, and therefore it is providing better resolution for choroidal vasculatures as well as the choroidal neovascular membrane. So you typically have this idea that whenever I am talking about the choroidal neovascularization, especially if it is a occult choroidal neovascularization, then which angiography should be preferred? It is the ICG, that is indocyanine green angiography. So I hope you had a clear insight about some of the important investigations starting from specular microscopy, anterior segment OCT, ultrasound biomicroscopy, fluorescein angiography, as well as the indocyanine green angiography. Thank you.